So a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. That's Proverbs 11:25. Today on a Season of Caring podcast, we're going to be exploring how routine and faith can benefit caregivers. Hi, this is Rayna Neises, your host on a Season of Caring podcast where there's hope for living, loving, and caring with no regrets. Thank you for joining me today. Last week on episode 125, I interviewed Deb Kelsey-Davis, where she shared about how technology had impacted her caregiving season with her parents. The one self-care tip that she offered was that each morning she gets up and with her coffee, she sits down to pray and to meditate and to read the word. And she uses technology to help her calm her mind and actually focus in on that daily routine. So I wanted to take that one nugget of wisdom from Deb. Let's start out by talking about the self-care habit of routine. The most important key to self-care is that self-care is not a one-time event. Rather, it's an ongoing event or a routine or habit. Routines in which we have incorporated into our lives helps to bring the most benefit. I found an article on WebMD that talked about the benefit of routines. It says that routines can help lower our stress level because it helps us to feel more in control. There's more predictability about life because we have a routine. It helps us to remember to pre-decide some of the things that can impact our overall stress level. This article mentions that we can get better sleep because we have a consistent sleep schedule when we have routines in our life. Bedtime routines have been found to be the number one way to improve your sleep. So if you're having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, developing a bedtime routine can make a big difference on that. It also mentions that you get better health because the routine helps you to establish regular exercise, which we all know is really important. They also help us take our medications or supplements regularly, which is so important, as well as they can help with meal planning. Planning ahead helps us eat healthier. We know that for sure. When we pre-decide what we're going to eat, we always make better choices than whenever we're just rushed and we pick up something on the fly. The last thing that the WebMD article mentioned was that we're happier when we have routines because we make time for the things that make us happy. I think that is so true. When we make time for those things that we love and we schedule in fun, we definitely have a happier life overall. And I think it's so important because things are so hectic in this season, and it's really easy to get busy and be stressed out and stop thinking about those people and those things that actually bring us joy. So having a routine helps us to keep those things regularly scheduled, and they would definitely help us have an overall better attitude about life. So when we're thinking about routines, we want to make sure that we have planned those things that are really important, like our physical exercise, obviously work, laundry, grocery shopping, all of the to-dos that we don't want to forget. We need to put them on our schedule. And fun, it's definitely one of them. Time with friends, walk outside, sitting down and watching a fun movie. Remember that routine can really help you keep the fun in life. So make sure you remember to schedule your fun. So I've convinced you need a routine, right? How do you do it? Let me tell you about that. We have a routine already. If you stop and think about it, you have things that you do every day in the same way, in the same order. So the first step is to start paying attention to what routines you already have in place. Creating a new routine from scratch is pretty much impossible. So you need to pay close attention to the current routine that you already have in place and think of one or two things you would like to add to that routine. So I want you to stop and think about the routines you already have in place. What's the very first thing you do when you get out of bed? What's the very last thing that you do before you run off to work? Those things are probably pretty consistent. So once you realize those routines, the best way to add a new habit to your routine is to attach it to something that you already do. Deb mentioned she loves to wake up and drink her coffee. If you're like that, that's one of the first things you do. Then if you would like to add a morning routine of meditation or prayer or scripture reading, then add it to drinking your coffee. You always drink the coffee, then you can start to always spend the time meditating and praying at that point. Those are two things that go together and will always be a natural connection between those two things. If you find something that you do every day and you want to attach a new behavior to it, that's going to give you the most success possible. So stop and think about the routines you already have in place. Then make small tweaks, maybe 1 or 2 changes to that routine. Get some consistency down and then pick something else. Oftentimes we jump right in. We want to make an all new routine, or we want to add a bunch of new healthy things to our routine. And these big changes all at once, they really seem to backfire. We get frustrated and then eventually we give up and move on to something else. So stop and think about what things you like to do, what things you'd like to add to your routine, and find something you're already doing to attach it to it. Another tool that might help you fine-tune your routines or improve the consistency of them is using a habit tracker or a progress tracker. Using a habit tracker can help you add healthy habits into your life. And it's also will help with consistency. I use the Christian Planner, and I love that there's scripture on every page, but it also has each week at the very bottom, it has a healthy habits tracker. It allows me to track what I'm paying close attention to. So I do a great job of drinking a lot of water whenever I'm tracking it. But I find when I stop tracking it, I have a tendency to just let it drift away. So not that I don't drink water, I just don't drink as much water. So tracking it really helps me to maintain my hydration, which we know is really good for our brains and everything else. Exercise is another one of those things. Having a goal of the number of steps per day and tracking whether or not I reach that goal has really helped me stay more active. I know it's much better to stay hydrated and drinking that water that I need every day, as well as exercising. So when I'm actually tracking it at the bottom of my planner, I find that it works better. I have a tendency to be more consistent. Now, there's great technology trackers as well. You can definitely search for those. I just find because I'm in my planner pretty much every day, it's a great place for me to find it, and it's looking at me right there. The last thing is definitely to give yourself a lot of grace. Anytime we're doing something new, we can find it difficult to be consistent. When we don't follow through on a new goal, we can become discouraged if we're too hard on ourselves. So give yourself grace. And remember, if you forget one day, it's just one day and you can always start again tomorrow. So if you're like me and at the bottom of your planner, your tracker's empty and you haven't done any tracking this week, just remember you can go back and pick it up next week. With any goal, it's not impossible to bring about change. It just takes time. So remember, start where you are, just keep moving forward. Those routines really can have a lot of benefits. So taking the time to think about your routine, picking in new things to add in, you'll be surprised at how much better your self-care is. And thanks to Deb for that great tidbit of wisdom. So the next piece that I wanted to explore today is faith and how our faith can impact our caregiving. Deb is the co-founder of Nourish for Caregivers. Nourish for Caregivers is an organization. Nourish for Caregivers is a nonprofit organization that's folding faith into supporting and helping caregivers. On their website, they state, in a sea of materials, websites, and programs for caregivers in the public domain, few focus on the whole person, and most lack the key element of faith. Nourish for Caregivers is the first of its kind, providing an effective faith-based program to minister to the practical, emotional, and spiritual needs of caregivers. Nourish offers an in-person, parish, church-based, or even synagogue-based support curriculum for face-to-face caregiving groups. And from the research that they've done, they've found that 90% of all healthcare is provided by family caregivers. And perhaps not so surprisingly, 60% of all caregivers report significant stress levels, with 40 to 60% of all caregivers suffering from depression and isolation. So as a result, the rates of caregivers dying before the person they're caring for has increased from 30% to 40% over just the last 2 years. With that information, it has motivated Nourish for Caregivers to do even more in supporting family caregivers. They did a survey of the people who had attended a Nourish for Caregivers meeting at the end of the meeting. And overall, 93% say their stress level is fully or somewhat decreased. 99% of participants find great connection and support from others. And 94% said their faith and prayer life is improved. So Nourish for Caregivers' goal is to bring that spiritual support into the support provided by caregivers. I'm honored to be able to facilitate their weekly house calls meeting, which is via Zoom. It's a support group that meets every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Time, and you're welcome to join in. We start each group with a prayer together, reading a scripture and discussing that scripture, and then we go around and offer support to each individual caregiver, closing with me praying over each person. This is a very precious time. We've been meeting for over 2 years, and we would love to have you join us. In order to be a part, you just need to sign up at nourishforcaregivers.com. So why faith? I mean, I think faith is a really personal thing, and many people don't want to talk about faith. I get that. It's an important part of who I am and the life that I live. So I'm a lot more comfortable talking about it probably than some people are. But I did find an interesting article on agingcare.com. They asked the question, how does your faith impact your caregiving? 19 caregivers responded. And a few of the things that they mentioned was it impacts their caregiving through prayer. It's a daily part of their life. It makes them feel not so alone during their caregiving. They feel supported by members of their church and others in their faith community. And many of them mention that they find peace and strength in the Lord during their caregiving season. I also found an article written by Carol Bradley Burshak on Health Central. Carol is an author of a book, and she's done a lot of research. And I found this quote really interesting. In her book, Faith in Alzheimer's, she interviewed Dr. Benjamin Bast. He's a clinical psychologist, associate professor of psychology and brain science and geriatric medicine at the University of Louisville. Dr. Mast is also the author of The Second Forgetting, Remembering the Power of the Gospel During Alzheimer's Disease. And really, this quote stood out to me. God's comfort and promises aren't always experienced as warm, fuzzy moments, especially in the midst of great difficulty like caregiving. Instead, we might experience God's power as the strength to continue on and to trust that He will provide, even though things are still very hard. Carol went on to write that the only way she's coped during her caregiving season was through her faith. Caregiving can mean that nothing seems to change as we go about our daily routines, endlessly keeping tabs on all that must be done for our vulnerable loved ones, yet knowing that the next moment of life-threatening or at least quality of life-threatening incident can occur at any time. The only way that Carol was able to cope with this environment and caregiving was through her faith. And she said, I knew I was never alone. My deeply held sense of spirituality has given me relief from the endless routines of caregiving, as well as life-changing crises. My core beliefs have helped me as a caregiver. Being a person of faith and through my caregiving journey, it was definitely a big component of my ability to hang in there all the way to the end. Even when I felt like I was at the end of my rope, prayer time was just what I needed. Being honest with the Lord and laying out all my concerns and struggles seemed to help me process those things, as well as be able to find peace in the midst of it. I could give it to Him. All the things I couldn't control, I could hand them over to Him and find peace. Even if I couldn't fix my dad, I couldn't change the progression of the disease, I could change my heart and my attitude. And the only way I could do that was through prayer. I found an article on Home Instead called The Need for Faith and Spirituality Along the Caregiving Journey, especially if faith has always been a part of your story. Make sure that you're continuing to include the faith journey in your caregiving. It can be challenging, especially when you're caring for someone who has Alzheimer's, because they might not be able to engage like they used to. You might have been able to pray together, read the word together, have deep conversations about your faith. But as the disease progresses, it impacts that ability to do that. But care partners definitely have a really important role in supporting their loved one's faith throughout their journey. Finding a way to interact together with where you are in the progression of the disease can be really precious as well. When I first started traveling to care for my dad, I stayed with him Thursday night through Sunday afternoon. My dad and I had not attended church together in years, and I mean years. After I hit elementary age, my parents didn't attend church with me. I went alone. And so it wasn't something that my dad and I did together. But during the 6 months, which I was there on Sunday mornings, I took my dad to church with me to a church up near his home. I have some amazing memories from that time of worshiping with him. It had been so long since we had been together in church, I really wasn't sure what to expect. But he was such a social guy. He loved seeing all the people. They were so welcoming and really enjoyed having him there. As soon as the music came on, it was amazing to watch him light up. I heard my dad's voice singing hymns I don't even remember hearing him sing before. He clapped his hands to songs he didn't know the words to, and we worshiped together. It was it's one of my most precious memories of our time together. He wasn't always the quietest during the sermon, but he also wasn't disruptive. He would often lean to me and ask questions. Did he hear that right? Or what did he mean by that? But really, he just enjoyed that time together. It was such a precious, precious time for us. And so I loved having that time with my dad. It was a hard decision for me to change my schedule and not continue to attend church with him. But I found the need to attend church with my husband greater. And so I changed my schedule to where I came into town earlier and left earlier. The most precious thing was that eventually some of the new caregivers stepped in and started taking dad to their church, and he had a great time there as well. So I loved being able to help him with his spiritual life, even in those years when things looked so different. Some of our caregivers prayed with him at night before he went to bed. That wasn't a routine that he and I had at any point in my life. So it was such a blessing to hear how he enjoyed that with other people as well. So remember, as we are caregivers, we need to take care of our own spiritual growth, but we also need to continue to consider that person which we're caring for and their spiritual growth. We need to look for our need of spiritual nourishment and theirs. And in this article from Home Instead, it talked about how to incorporate faith and spirituality into your daily caregiving. So definitely regularly attending worship service if you can, or even watching services on TV, sharing and reading prayers or scripture together, listening and singing along with hymns or songs. We all know how music touches those, even those with Alzheimer's disease. So it's definitely one of those things that will bring up great memories. In fact, the left side of the brain, which is the logical problem-solving side of the brain, is the side which is impacted most significantly first, leaving the right side of the brain, which actually holds hymns and prayers. So oftentimes that's one of the last things that will leave a person's memory are those hymns and prayers. So keeping that in mind when we're considering who we're caring for and what their needs are, helping to address their spiritual needs can bring a whole new level of comfort and peace for them as well. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that the topics of routine and spirituality can be helpful to you as you are continuing this important journey of family caregiving. This episode of the Season of Caring podcast has been brought to you by the Encouragement series, Hope Over Regrets, living with hope while caring for your overall well-being and avoiding the regrets of looking back and wishing you had done it different. This free series will be coming to you in November. If you would like to get on a list to learn more as details become available, visit www.encouragementseries.com. Again, that's encouragementseries.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. And remember, A Season of Caring podcast has been created for the encouragement of family caregivers. If you have financial, legal, or medical questions, be sure to consult your local professional and take part in your season of caring.